Let's walk, shall we? I'm walking on this path by the canal here, Trent Mersey Canal. I walked across that field there. There is no path across that field, but you can still get across it now. As I say, I'm on the towpath here. I'm thinking about paths, and I'm reminded of an Ivor Cutler song. Ivor Cutler is this really great... do you know Ivor Cutler? Ivor Cutler is this really great... He's dead now, he died about 5 or 6 years ago. He's a Scottish poet and performer. He does these really gorgeous little songs, often accompanied by I think it's a harmonium or something like that. But anyway, he's got this song which begins about paths. It's more like a poem actually, he recites it rather than sings it. It says, many feet make one path, many feet make one path, I walk on a footpath. And then it goes on to talk about how different people walking on the same path eventually make the path, you know. Look at the path we have made, he says. Look at the path we have made. And there's something about this path thing, isn't it, which is a peculiarly ambulatory process, an ambulatory creative process. You know, walking makes the path. I mean, this particular path, the canal path, I guess was thought about in advance, but most paths aren't like that. They're created by the unofficial, informal processes of people getting from one place to another, on foot, almost exclusively. And it has to be communal. It has to be. It's not planned. In fact, I think this is an example of wisdom of crowds, the stuff that James Sirowicki talks about in the book called The Wisdom of Crowds. I don't think he uses this example, but you know, there's something there about smart choices, smart routes from A to B, being devised not by the visionary processes of some architect or the output of some algorithm on a computer that generates the best answer to the travelling salesman problem or something like that, but it's about thousands of people's experience being somehow collected and aggregated and processed informally into one of these things, into a path. I think there's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, I'll have to find out, about an American university which was being built, I think sometime in the 70s or early 80s, and when they'd finished putting the buildings up, rather than build any paths between these buildings, they just opened it, they just populated it with students and faculty and left it like that, with the outsides effectively unfinished. And when they did that, after a few months, what they did was they returned to the site, and of course the students and faculty moving from one building to another had created these what are called desire paths, the paths of least resistance, the paths between one place and another that they actually needed to use. And of course some of these were very faint, just used by a few students and staff. Some of them were very deeply worn furrows. And at that point the architects knew exactly where to put the paths down, because the wisdom of the crowd of people making thousands of journeys across this landscape in accordance with their desires had selected the optimal routes for those paths to take. So it's an example of the wisdom of crowds in path design. And I think this idea of the path, the path that that is the result of experience and is the result of history and tradition. Not exactly tradition, but kind of. That has been traditionally established by people with the same aims and goals and endpoints in mind, making the same journeys, optimising those journeys, and that optimisation being collected. I think there's something about that which plays into metaphors of paths, actually. We'll go around this corner here. Because when we talk about, certainly the idea of the path, as opposed to other journey types, as opposed to roads or streets or different kind of ways, the idea of the path, I think, has this appeal to historical tradition and crowd wisdom and history. Now I'm thinking something like the way of the master, or those other kind of religious mobilisations of paths, and not just religions, but also secular mobilisations of path metaphors, to indicate this as a route to wisdom. Almost as if you're relying on the wisdom of past crowds to validate the choice that you're making. You know what I mean? You can say to someone, this is a wise path to take in life. Look at the thousands of people who've worn this path down Look how established this path has become over time. I mean, you would certainly say that literally, wouldn't you, if you wanted to? If you wanted to advise someone how to get from A to B, you would say, take this path. Thousands of people have taken that path, and it's clearly the optimal route. But you might say that metaphorically as well, you know. Follow in the footsteps of the master, and you will get to a wise place. But the implication being, of course, you're not just following in the footsteps of one master, you follow in the footsteps of all those who've gone before you, who've also followed in the footsteps of the master. And the many feet make one path, as Ivor Cutler says. Look at the path we have made. You know, there's an appeal to the authority of history and the suggestion, and it's borrowing from this metaphor of a wisdom of crowds that make the path. It must be a smart path, because look how many people have followed it. It must be a smart journey in life. It must be a smart set of life choices. It must be a smart destination to take a life in. It must be a wise thing to want to do, because look how many people have done it. Look how established the path is. And I suppose if we were wanting to try to create that, we would want to reinforce that. And I think people do that, don't they? When people want to establish the credibility for an idea or a lifestyle choice. So, but I'm thinking again religiously, but perhaps outside of religious circles again. Quite often there's an appeal to history. Look how established this tradition is. It must be wise. There's a programme on Radio 4 a couple of weeks ago about An Anatomy of Melancholy, which is a book by Burton from, I don't know, hundreds of years ago, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, something like that. And it isn't exactly to do with what I'm talking about, but I hope I can relate it. And in that book, which is a collection of writings about melancholy, about what we'd now call depression, and about kind of medical treatments for it, personal experiences of it, that kind of thing. But it's based on what was referred to as the humoral theory of disease. The humoral theory of disease, which is that all diseases, including things like melancholy, are a result of imbalances in the humours in the body. We have 4 humours in the body, so it says, black bile, yellow bile, blood and phlegm. And these are like the power-ups that we've got in our body. And if they go out of balance, then we become diseased in some way. Our ease is destabilised. And if you have too much black bile, then you have melancholy. Melancholy almost literally translates into black bile. So, why am I saying? Oh yeah, because the reason why I say this is because the idea of the humoral theory of disease goes back to Aristotle, I think. It certainly goes back well over 2,000 years now. So it was well over 1,200 years old when Burton came across it and was writing about it in the, whatever it was, 15th, 16th centuries. And it had been picked up by Galen and other people in the meantime. But no one had really tested it. And the establishing of it, the belief in it, the authority of the humoral theory of disease was established by sheer weight of its history. People have been doing this for 1,200 years. Aristotle talked about it, Galen talked about it, hundreds of manuscripts have been written about it. Hundreds, if not thousands, of practitioners have used this in their, admittedly, probably pretty redundant treatment of diseases. It's in all the language. It must be true. You know, many people have walked this path of the humoral theory of disease. Many people have laid their footsteps down in that path in the form of more manuscripts, in the form of personal accounts, in the form of bogus remedies, in the form of poems, in the form of pieces of writing, in the form of tributes to Aristotle and Galen and the rest. It must be true. Look how firm the path is. Look at the path we have made. So I think that's an example of how wisdom, at least in that sense, becomes the way. You know, wisdom establishes the way to do things. And you get it in the practical, I guess that is practical what I just said, but you also get it in practical terms too, don't you? You know, people who are have particular expertise in certain crafts, quite often, for good reason, will say, you know, this is the way we've always done this and it works really well, and are perhaps resistant to change for good reason, but also sometimes for bad reasons. This is the way we've always done this. it seems to establish the conditions for wisdom, but it doesn't really. And the way you've always done something is not necessarily an indicator of wisdom. It's an indicator that this is a path that a lot of people have walked down, which might be an indicator that takes you somewhere wise, or it takes you somewhere in a wise way, but not necessarily. It's a borrowing from the laying down of the path metaphor. I am the way, says Jesus Christ. I am the way. There's something else I was going to talk about in terms of paths. Oh, I suppose I was just going to think about The Old Straight Path. Is that what it's called, The Old Straight Path? The Old Straight Path is a book by, I can't remember his name. It's a beautiful book, and quite a modest book in many ways. It's a book which is about the English landscape, and it's talking about lines, what this guy perceived to be lines in the landscape. He noticed, looking at where churches were, where crossroads were, where particular geographical features, like a notch in a hillside where two hills come together. He noticed these things, and on a map he said, these things seem to go in lines. And he called these things ley lines. Ley is an old word which means meadow, because a lot of these lines seem to go through places that had L-E-Y, ley, at the end of them. Place names, a lot of English place names have L-E-Y at the end of them because they're built on or near meadows. So we call these things ley lines. It's since been fairly well established that this is not true, but he didn't make any particular claims for it. He suggests that these were probably pack routes for travellers before there were proper maps and proper roads were laid down. People probably navigated between points of the countryside by using these ley lines, by sighting this crossroads, this notch on the hill, and that will tell you where to go, and you can get from one place to another by moving from one landmark to another in these straight lines. That was his suggestion, I think. But of course it's been picked on many times since as these things are mysterious force fields in the earth. And I think in some ways that's I think kind of trying to inherit some of the, if not the literal wisdom, almost the essence of wisdom. You know what I mean? It's taking the idea of the path, which is the laying down of, and the collection, the aggregation of wisdom by through these wisdom gathering processes that I've already talked about. It seems to be taking that and essentializing it, and saying, oh yes, this wisdom is almost like a free floating force that exists somewhere in the universe, and it manifests in these ley lines. And look how they all cross at Glastonbury Tor or whatever, which they don't, by the way, but it seems to me there's something going on there about how we can take an idea of wisdom, in this case the wisdom of a crowd to create a path, turn it into a metaphor for a path towards enlightenment, a path towards knowledge, a path towards expertise, a path towards a wise outcome, and then essentialize that into the essence of a path in the form of mysterious forces associated with ley lines. Anyhow, that's the field I just walked across, by the way. I walked across this field up there behind where these bushes are, near those trees, and then came back down here, and now I'm on this bit of a railway line. You probably can't see it in there, but I walk across that field every day, most days, and I can just about, on days like this, see the path that I've made over the last couple of weeks. It's not a well-trod path. It's a path less trod. But I can just about see my own history in there. But I couldn't, in all honesty, call it wisdom. It's just habit.